Mr. Reed and Mr. Mauer are on vacation, and the other members of council are present, as is our first selectman, Mr. Kellogg. With respect to the consent calendar, are there any objections or comments relative thereto? All right, I'll pass the consent calendar as printed. We have communications A through L, and as they be incorporated into the minutes of the meeting. And we're on to public participation. Are there any members of the public who wish to participate in the first public participation session? All right, seeing none, I'll close public participation. We have one appointment this evening. It's Jean Nicolette to the Commission for Aging. Ms. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd ask this council to approve the appointment of Jean Nicolette, 3 Underhill Road, to the Commission for the Aging for a term ending July 2nd, 2022.
Motion by Ms. Martin. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. LaPellis. Discussion, Ms. Martin.
Jean Nicolette has lived in Monroe for 18 years. She holds a bachelor's and a master's degree in nursing. She worked for several years as a nurse at St. Vincent's Medical Center, followed by 10 years as an instructor at the St. Vincent School of Nursing, followed by an additional 10 years in the Quality Management Department at St. Vincent's. She currently lives in High Meadows and has served on High Meadows Association Board for 8 years. Ms. Nicolette is a member of St. Jude's Parish, where she served as the Eucharistic minister and facilitates a bereavement support group. She's an active user of the Monroe Senior Center and very much looks forward to contributing to the Senior Center as a member of the Commission of Aging.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor and against, the motion carries 7-0. Is Ms. Nicolette present? I don't believe so. Okay. We'll move on to our action items. The first matter this evening is the Committee on Finance, Education, Health, and Public Safety. Mr. Rennie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have not met since last council.
B is Planning and Zoning, Public Works, and Parks and Recreation. Ms. LaPellis?
Planning and zoning hasn't met. Park and Rec just met, and I believe Mrs. Martin went to that.
I did, actually, they're still meeting. Just a couple interesting things. The beach sand is in 400 tons of beach sand
Wow.
that they've spread there. I haven't been down to see it, but it looks good. They talked about their concerts and the programs being well attended, and that this evening, I guess, we have the contract for the concession stuff to look at, so Mr. Kellogg will go through that, but they're still meeting right now.
Very good. Anything further, Mr. Post?
No.
Okay. C is the L&A subcommittee. We did meet this evening. Ms. Aguilar and I, we did discuss all of the agreements which we will be considering at council this evening. All of them did pass unanimously to 0 for consideration by council. And again, I want to thank the department heads who did attend the meeting for giving us the information that we needed to vet those matters. It's always helpful, and I appreciate that. I can have mine. And that's all. Strategic planning, I'm happy to state that we have a date that we hope works for all on strategic planning. It's August the 7th at 7 p.m.
I won't be there.
Are you on strategic planning?
No, I'm not.
I was waiting for you to say. I was waiting for you to say.
I was waiting for you to say it.
I thought you wanted the whole council there. Okay, you can have the meeting without me.
And at that meeting, we will elect leadership and dive into the business that I'm assuming is waiting for us. So 8/7 at 7 p.m., strategic planning. EMS building committee, is there any update, Mr. Rennie?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did meet. We have selected a contractor. We're in negotiations for contracts. As you know, these AIA contracts are a little bit involved. So there were some questions from the town attorney and the selectmen in our last meeting, also some adjustments by the contractor that we have decided to move forward with. So we're still in negotiations with that. We should have some clarity hopefully towards the middle of August, and by the August 26th meeting, we should be able to vote on it. So
Great.
That's where we are currently. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very good, thank you, Mr. Rooney. On to the first selectmen's update, Mr. Keller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start with a couple of announcements on leadership positions in the town. First, I'm happy to welcome Henna Ali as our new Director of Community and Social Services. Henna has 10 years of experience in the medical residential care field. She's done administration and programming. She works quite often with the senior population and disabled individuals as well. She's coming to us from Eagle Landing Residential Care Homes, where she was operations and administrative director. She's led an organization with 50 employees and has degrees in psychology and a master's in healthcare administration. So she started today. Amy Lakioma is still with us on a per diem basis, helping out in the transition process and helping to train her up. In the Inland Wetlands Department, Denise Halstead has assumed the full-time role of the Inland Wetlands Coordinator. As you know, she joined us part-time in 2018 and now will be with us full-time in the new Inland Wetlands Coordinator role. She has 20 years of experience in engineering and site development, working with other municipalities, and has degrees in civil engineering and an MBA. And last but certainly not least, I wanted to just share with the council that we had a very remarkable event last week in town where a business, Sippin Energy, celebrated 100 years in Monroe. It's the oldest business in town. It was an honor for me to be invited along with our EDC chairman. I know members from our chamber, such as Mr. Hostler, who's in the audience, was also in attendance. But it was important to recognize their significant contributions to our town, not just in the economic growth, but also the significant contributions that they've made to various town programs and nonprofit organizations throughout the community. And so I just wanted to recognize them and ask that you join me in congratulating them on that milestone.
Thank you, Mr. Kellogg. We have no unfinished business this evening, and we have 4 items of new business. The first being the resolution regarding the Fitzgerald and Halliday and Consultant Services Agreement for the POCD. Mr. Pauls, is there a motion?
Yep, I will introduce the resolution regarding Fitzgerald and Halliday Incorporated Consultant Service Agreement for update the POCD and move for its adoption. Resolved that Kenneth N. Kellogg, first selectman of the town of Monroe, is authorized to execute and deliver on behalf of the town of Monroe the consultant agreement for professional services and any associated documents by and between Fitzgerald and Halliday Incorporated to update the POCD.
Motion by Mr. Pellis, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Formicella. For discussion, I will allow Mr. Kellogg to introduce this matter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as you're all well aware that the town is due for its statutorily required 10-year update of the Plan of Conservation and Development that is due in 2020. The Planning and Zoning Commission is charged with that update, and they have endeavored to go through an RFP process to select a firm to do that, to be a consultant in doing that work. They have gone through that process and recommended this firm, Fitzgerald and Halliday, to do that. And as a result, we have worked further to negotiate the contract that you have in your package, which I know our town attorney has looked at and has actually made some, he assisted in making some minor changes to that as well. We have our town planner, Rick Schultz, and our P&Z administrator, Will Agresta, here. If you have any further questions about that in the process, I just wanted to highlight, as I mentioned in L&A, one thing I was very happy about in this agreement, and my understanding from those that were involved in the review process on P&Z and our staff, is that this firm was very strong in their public involvement and public input to the process, which was very important to me and to everyone else involved in this process. So.
Thank you, Mr. Kellogg. Again, LNA did review this agreement. We had significant and I think very thorough discussion with Mr. Schultz and Mr. We're extremely excited about this vendor from a number of different standpoints. I think I can speak on behalf of Ms. Aguilar and I that we were encouraged by the amount of involvement that the department heads had in the selection of the vendor, as well as our Planning and Zoning Commission. So it was a very thorough discussion, and they gave us a lot of information as to why they thought this was the best candidate, and they seemed to me very encouraged about this project moving forward. So that was something I just wanted to reiterate without having council have to ask all the same questions again. But they're here if anybody wants to ask them any specific questions about the selection process or the document itself. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, I will call for a vote. All of those in favor? And against, that motion carries 7-0. The second item of new business is the resolution regarding George Sansucci, P.E. LLC, agreement for the valuation services associated with the Stevenson hydroelectric property. Mr. Pauls.
I will introduce the following resolution. Resolution regarding George E. Sansucci, P.E. LLC, agreement for valuation services, and move for its adoption. Resolved that Kenneth M. Kellogg, first selectman of the town of Monroe, is authorized to execute and deliver on behalf of the town of Monroe the appraisal agreement and any associated documents by and between George E. Sansucci, P.E. LLC, for valuation services associated with the Stevenson hydroelectric dam.
Motion by Ms. LaPellis, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Rooney. Again, for discussion, Mr. Kellogg, if you would introduce this, please.
Thank you. So, as you know, we are in the midst of the statutorily required property revaluation effort, something Mr. Feldman is actively engaged with. One of the carve-outs in our agreement with Vision Government Solutions is this property, the hydroelectric dam, because of the significant level of expertise required to appropriately assess, it's really not so much the property, it's the personal property, the equipment owned by the dam. So Mr. Feldman has done his due diligence to identify the best expert in the field that would be most beneficial and preserve the town's interests and rights in that regard. So if there's any other questions, I refer to Justin, but again, this has been reviewed by the town attorney as well.
Thank you, Mr. Kellogg. Any further discussion? Again, I'll just say again that in LNA, we did have a thorough conversation with Mr. Feldman, and we were unanimously in agreement that his reasoning for the selection of this particular vendor was more than appropriate, and we believe that it is certainly in the best interest of the town to retain this professional as soon as possible so that he can properly serve as a consultant to Mr. Feldman in properly evaluating that asset in the town. This is also the same vendor that performed the similar services to the last valuation, correct?
Correct, right?
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? And against? Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, Mr. Feldman. The next matter of new business is the laser scan technology for the police department. There are two resolutions. We'll do it as one. The resolution to appropriate $40,439 from the police private duty fund, and a resolution regarding the sales agreement itself with the vendor Faro Technologies Inc. for a data collection technology. So without further ado there, Ms. LaPellis, is there a motion?
I will introduce the following resolutions. Resolutions regarding the FARO Technologies Laser Scanner System and move for their adoptions. Be it resolved that $40,439 be appropriated from available funds within assigned fund balance of the Police Private Duty Fund to acquire a FARO Technology Laser System Scan for the Police Department for fiscal year 2020. Be it further resolved that Kenneth M. Kellogg, first selectman of the town of Monroe, is authorized to execute and deliver on behalf of the town of Monroe the purchase agreement and any associated documents by and between FARO Technologies Incorporated for the laser scanner data collection system for the police department.
Motion by Ms. LaPellis. It's a dual-part resolution. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Rooney. Again, Mr. Kellogg, introduction.
Thank you. So the police department has a current system that they utilize to collect and process certain data at major scenes, such as crash scenes and crime scenes. The current system is towards the end of its service life. The chief, who is here tonight, can certainly speak to this in more detail, but he has identified an unusual opportunity to replace the system with a state-of-the-art system made by Faro Technologies at a significantly lower cost than might otherwise be available on the market. and Faro's system will already integrate with our existing data mapping, or the back-end mapping process that these systems you do integrate with. Because we don't have, this opportunity came about, we did not have an existing funding source, so that's the reason for the other part of the resolution that I've asked for tonight is to appropriate the funds for this through the police special private duty fund. And as always, the town attorney has reviewed this and has his letter of opinion, and I would defer to the chief for any specifics on the system and how this will help. I know that he has said he anticipates it will expedite scene processing time and get roads open faster and potentially lower costs of processing scenes as well in terms of overtime and things like that.
Thank you, Mr. Kellogg. Again, this was discussed in LNA, and it did pass unanimously for council to consider it. There were a number of questions that, I think, a few questions that we had for the chief. So Chief, if you don't mind, would you just explain this in a little bit detail for us as to why you chose this vendor, the opportunity? And I think some of the questions were, are there any ongoing costs for further licensing? Is there any training required, things like that?
Right. The visual system we have right now is what's called LTI, Laser Technologies, is incorporated, I believe it was. Several years ago, LTI sold this portion of their business off to Faro. So the software that we have, the analytical software in the station at headquarters, the actual mapping, is already Faro. The collection components, the equipment on the street, the actual scanner, that's still LTI. It was working with the previous versions of Faro. They've now done an upgrade, and we're having some difficulty. It's a little clunky. We're actually conversing with the company. They're working through it, but it's taken a lot of time. So not only is it time consuming on scene to collect the data, it's now consuming more time inside on computers trying to convert the data we collected to the mapping device. So Faro came up with a recent demonstration for us. Our 3 accident or crash reconstructionists went through it. They said the amount of time they could spend on scene is probably reduced in half with the new equipment. Faro offered us a great price initially, and I said, well, it's still too much. It was in the 50s, mid-50s. And then about a week and a half later, when we started to look into it again, they came back with an even lower price. I think they want to get the new systems into operation. We know a couple of departments that are already using them. They're being used with great satisfaction on the user's part. As I said, it'll work with the Faro software that we already have in operation in the back-end side, as the first selectman mentioned. So I thought it was too good of an opportunity to pass up, so that's why I'm asking for the special funding.
Ms. Aguilar?
As far as training, that's part of the price.
Okay.
How old is the current system, the LTI system?
Well, the actual data collection portion
Yeah.
goes back years. It's probably in decades.
And how many times a year about is this used?
It depends. If we have serious crashes, we bring out the equipment.
Okay.
We've had a couple of fatalities. We didn't have one yet this year, thankfully, but last year we had one, and before that, we'll bring it out. We suspect the injuries are so serious it might be significant. We have to bring out the construction team to do it.
Ms. Martin?
Chief, what does this do to the private duty fund? This amount of money out of it?
Well, I don't have the actual balance. I'm at the first selectman, and the
I-
finance director told me there's
the
adequate
fund will
funding
remain very
available.
healthy.
It is, no? Okay.
I asked the finance director about that earlier, so.
Is that true?
It is true.
Okay, good.
It will stay healthy,
Very healthy.
very healthy.
It's a different world, Ms. Martin. Different times. Any further discussion? Anybody else? No? Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank
that.
you, Chief.
Seeing no further discussion, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? And against, motion carries 7-0. And the last item of business this evening is the Wolf Park agreement with Romeo's Deli and Grill LLC for the concessions at Wolf Park. Ms. Haas.
I will introduce the following resolution. Resolution regarding Wolf Park concession temporary agreement and move for its adoption. Resolved that Kenneth Kellogg, First Selectman of the Town of Monroe, is authorized to execute and deliver on behalf of the Town of Monroe the temporary license agreement and any associated documents by and between Romeo's Deli and Grill LLC for the concessions at Wolf Park.
Motion by Ms. LaPels, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Martin. For discussion again, Mr. Kellogg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as you are all well aware, we've been working very hard to identify a potential vendor to operate the concessions at the park. We have an opportunity with Romeo's Deli and Grill to conduct an abbreviated season, which would essentially be Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays at the pool, and the special events like the character dinners and the different nights, and the football season as well. The other aspect of this agreement is the option for Romeo's to extend the term for a full season in 2020, which would be full-time at the pool. Certainly something that I think would be beneficial for us to lock in as well, because we certainly would rather have a vendor secured than not. The terms of the agreement are somewhat, in most cases, similar to what we had for our previous vendor last year, other than the payment terms are slightly different, and we have slightly different cost share on the cleaning of the hoods at the end of the season and the grease traps. Other than that, it's essentially similar to last year's agreement. If there's any questions, happy to entertain it. And I know I saw Missy Oro's director has joined us as well from her other meetings, so we can certainly answer any questions. And the Attorney Hayden has obviously put this agreement together, so he's issued his memo in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Kellogg. Again, council did discuss this in its, LNA did discuss this in its meeting and approved it 2-0 for consideration by council.
I'm
Yes.
sorry, I just failed to mention, I want to mention that while their current establishment is in Shelton, the Romeo's, Ariel and Mike, the owners, are Monroe residents as well.
Thank you, Mr. Kellogg. Any further discussion? I have a question for Ms. Oros. What impact has the lack of concessions had on the patrons of the park?
To be
your
honest
knowledge.
with you, because last year, the previous concession didn't start till around this time, they've been bringing their own snacks and stuff. And we've had an ice cream truck and a popcorn at the special event, so we were able to offer something. So I think it's gonna be a pleasant surprise that we're getting it done, so, and then, yeah, no really complaints.
Good. Anybody else? Thank you very much, Ms.
All right,
Oros.
thank you. Thank
Seeing no
you.
further discussion, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? And against, that motion carries 7-0. That brings us to our very interesting second public participation this evening. There are no unresolved items, but if anybody wishes to speak, please let me know. All right, seeing nobody, I'll close second public participation. Mr. Mauer is not here this evening, so I'm going to need some help with a motion to adjourn. Mrs.
So
Wells.
moved.
Thank you very much. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Ring. All those in favor? Motion carries 7-0. Have a good evening, everybody.